Hello, darling.
How you doing? All right, lovely, yeah.
Great.
It's great to meet you, man. It's been a lifetime.
Nobody expected Paul McCartney to finally say this about Ozzy Osbourne, especially at 83 years old. And when the truth finally came out, rock fans around the world realized the story between these two legends was far deeper and far more emotional than anyone ever imagined. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the very end, because this is not just another celebrity story. This is the hidden emotional connection between two of the greatest legends music has ever seen. For years, the world viewed Paul McCartney and Ozzy Osbourne as complete opposites. One represented melody, peace, and timeless songwriting. The other became the face of darkness, rebellion, and heavy metal chaos. Their music sounded different. Their images were different. Even their audiences seemed to belong to different worlds entirely. But behind all the headlines and public images, there was a hidden story quietly developing for decades, a story built not on rivalry, but on admiration. And when Paul McCartney finally opened up about Ozzy in recent years, fans realized the rumors had been true all along. There was always a deep mutual respect between them, and perhaps even something more emotional than anyone expected. To truly understand why this story matters, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Long before Ozzy Osbourne became the Prince of Darkness, he was just a poor young boy growing up in Birmingham, England. Life was difficult. His family struggled financially, school felt hopeless, and the future looked painfully uncertain. Ozzy often spoke about feeling lost during those early years, like he had no real direction in life. Then suddenly, everything changed because of four young men from Liverpool. The moment Ozzy heard the Beatles for the first time, something inside him woke up. Their music didn't just entertain him, it completely transformed his understanding of what life could become. For the first time, he believed ordinary people could escape ordinary lives. And at the center of that inspiration stood Paul McCartney. Years later, Ozzy admitted in interviews that the Beatles inspired him to become a musician. Without them, he believed his entire life may have turned out differently. Think about that for a moment. One of the most influential heavy metal artists in history was deeply shaped by the soft melodies and emotional songwriting of Paul McCartney. It almost sounds impossible, but that's exactly what makes this story so powerful. Behind Ozzy's wild image was a lifelong Beatles fan who never stopped admiring Paul. In fact, Ozzy once described meeting Paul McCartney as feeling like he was meeting Jesus Christ himself. Fans laughed at first when they heard that comparison, but the truth behind it was incredibly emotional. Ozzy wasn't joking. That was genuinely how much Paul meant to him. As Ozzy's fame exploded with Black Sabbath during the 1970s, his life became increasingly chaotic. Drugs, alcohol, controversies, shocking stage moments. The media transformed him into a symbol of danger and madness. Parents feared him. Critics attacked him. Many believed Ozzy represented the darkest side of rock music. Meanwhile, Paul McCartney continued carrying the enormous legacy of the Beatles while building a successful solo career of his own. On the surface, these two artists seemed to exist in completely separate universes. But despite all the differences, Ozzy never stopped speaking about Paul with admiration. Every time their paths crossed backstage at events or award shows, Ozzy reportedly became nervous like a child meeting his hero. Imagine that scene for a second. One of the most feared rock stars on earth suddenly becoming speechless in front of Paul McCartney. It revealed something deeply human beneath Ozzy's larger-than-life image. Over time, fans began hearing rumors about the strange connection between these two legends. Some believed Paul secretly admired Ozzy's honesty and authenticity. Others believed there had once been talks about possible collaborations between them. Then one particular story exploded among rock fans everywhere. Ozzy revealed that he once personally asked Paul McCartney to play bass on one of his songs. The idea sounded unbelievable. A Beatle collaborating with the Prince of Darkness felt almost too legendary to be real. But according to Ozzy, the conversation actually happened. And Paul's response surprised everyone. He politely declined, not because he disliked Ozzy, but because he believed the song already had a perfectly good bass line. That simple response stayed with Ozzy for years because it reflected the kind of person Paul truly was. Honest, humble, calm, no ego, no fake Hollywood behavior. Just genuine honesty from one legend to another. As decades passed, both men experienced pain, loss, and personal battles in very different ways. Paul McCartney endured unimaginable heartbreak after the murder of John Lennon, an event that changed him forever. Carrying the Beatles' legacy became both a blessing and a heavy emotional responsibility. Every public appearance reminded people of a golden era that could never fully return. Ozzy Osbourne, meanwhile, continued fighting addiction and self-destruction for years. Many people assumed his career would eventually end in tragedy. But somehow, Ozzy survived every storm that tried to destroy him. And over time, survival itself became part of his legend. Fans no longer saw only controversy when they looked at Ozzy. They saw resilience. They saw vulnerability. They saw a man who somehow kept standing no matter how many times life knocked him down. Then came the years that changed everything. Ozzy's health began seriously declining. Multiple surgeries, spinal injuries, and Parkinson's disease slowly transformed the unstoppable rock icon fans once knew. Watching Ozzy struggle physically became heartbreaking for millions of people who grew up listening to his music. Yet even during his darkest moments, Ozzy refused to completely disconnect from the audience that loved him. That determination touched fans deeply. Suddenly, the man once mocked by critics became a symbol of survival and perseverance. And during this emotional chapter of Ozzy's life, something remarkable happened. Paul McCartney finally began publicly acknowledging Ozzy with genuine warmth and respect. Not as a joke. Not casually. But sincerely. For many fans, this was the confirmation they had waited decades to hear. The rumors had always been true. Paul genuinely respected Ozzy Osbourne. And when Paul McCartney respects someone, the world notices. Because Paul has seen every era of modern music history. He witnessed rock music evolve from tiny clubs into massive global movements. He watched artists rise, disappear, self-destruct, and fade into irrelevance. Yet Ozzy Osbourne somehow remained unforgettable through it all. Not polished. Not perfect. But undeniably real. That authenticity became Ozzy's greatest strength. Unlike many celebrities carefully manufactured by the music industry, Ozzy never felt fake. His flaws were public. His mistakes were visible. His struggles were real. And perhaps Paul McCartney admired that honesty more than people realized. As old interviews resurfaced online, younger generations suddenly became fascinated by the emotional relationship between these two legends. Clips of Ozzy talking about Paul McCartney spread across social media, gaining millions of views. Fans noticed how emotional Ozzy became whenever he spoke about the Beatles. The internet slowly realized something beautiful hidden beneath decades of fame and controversy. This story wasn't about rivalry at all. It was about inspiration. A young boy from Birmingham heard Beatles music and dared to dream bigger because of it. That boy eventually became Ozzy Osbourne. And decades later, the very man who inspired him publicly acknowledged his legacy with respect. It felt like a full-circle moment in rock history itself. What makes this story even more emotional is the reality of time. Paul McCartney is now in his 80s. Ozzy Osbourne has faced serious health battles that changed his life forever. Fans understand that they are witnessing the final living chapter of an entire musical generation. That realization changes how people hear these interviews and stories. Every public appearance matters more now. Every kind word feels heavier. Because legends do not live forever. Eventually, all that remains are the stories people continue telling long after the music stops. And perhaps that's why Paul McCartney finally confirming his admiration for Ozzy touched so many people around the world. It reminded audiences that behind the fame, behind the scandals, behind the mythology, even legends remain human beings capable of admiring one another. For years, the world tried to turn every celebrity relationship into competition. Fans constantly searched for feuds, rivalries, jealousy, and drama. But the truth between Paul McCartney and Ozzy Osbourne turned out to be something far more meaningful. Respect. Genuine respect between two artists who changed music forever in completely different ways. One brought melody and emotional songwriting to millions. The other brought darkness, power, and fearless rebellion to rock music. Yet somehow, their stories became connected across generations. And maybe that's the greatest revelation of all. Music itself has no boundaries. Inspiration travels across every genre, every style, and every era. Without Paul McCartney and the Beatles, perhaps Ozzy Osbourne never becomes a musician. And without artists like Ozzy pushing music into darker territory, rock history itself may have evolved very differently. Today, millions of fans look back at both men with a completely different perspective. They no longer see only the public images created by the media. They see two survivors. Two icons. Two human beings who unknowingly became part of each other's stories. And in the end, that may be more powerful than any collaboration ever could have been. Because while songs eventually fade into history, respect between legends becomes immortal. What shocked fans even more was realizing that Paul McCartney and Ozzy Osbourne were never truly separated by music at all. On the surface, yes, their sounds were completely different. Paul helped create emotional melodies that changed pop and rock forever, while Ozzy helped create heavy metal with terrifying intensity and darkness. But underneath those differences, both men shared something powerful. They understood pain, pressure, loneliness, and the impossible burden of becoming living legends. And perhaps that invisible understanding created a bond the public never fully noticed until now. As the music industry evolved through the decades, countless artists came and went. Entire genres exploded into popularity and then disappeared almost overnight. But somehow, both Paul McCartney and Ozzy Osbourne survived every changing era. They became larger than music itself. Younger generations who were not even alive during the Beatles era still knew Paul McCartney's name instantly. At the same time, teenagers discovering heavy metal for the first time continued treating Ozzy Osbourne like a mythical figure. Very few artists in history achieved that level of timelessness. And maybe that's why Paul eventually saw Ozzy differently than many critics once did. He wasn't looking at headlines or controversy anymore. He was looking at another survivor who endured decades of pressure that ordinary people could never fully understand. Behind closed doors, fame changes people in ways audiences rarely see. Fans imagine luxury, excitement, and endless success, but many legendary musicians quietly admit that fame can become isolating. Every mistake becomes global news. Every personal struggle becomes entertainment for strangers. Every public appearance carries enormous expectations. Paul McCartney experienced this pressure after the Beatles became the biggest band in history. He lived through worldwide hysteria unlike anything music had ever seen before. Meanwhile, Ozzy endured years of media ridicule, public criticism, and addiction battles that nearly destroyed his life completely. Their journeys looked different from the outside, but emotionally, both men understood what it meant to carry impossible weight on their shoulders for decades. And perhaps that's why Paul's words about Ozzy suddenly felt so emotional to fans around the world. Because when one legend recognizes another legend's humanity, it means something deeper than awards or chart success ever could. Paul McCartney wasn't praising Ozzy because of publicity. He wasn't trying to create headlines. At this stage in life, neither man needs attention anymore. They already achieved immortality in music history. That's what made the moment feel so genuine. Paul's acknowledgement came from sincerity, and fans could feel that immediately. For Ozzy Osbourne, hearing respect from Paul McCartney likely meant more than almost any award he ever received. Imagine spending your entire life inspired by someone, only to eventually earn their admiration in return. That's an incredibly rare and emotional full-circle moment. And suddenly, fans began revisiting old interviews with completely new eyes. They noticed how Ozzy's face changed whenever Paul's name came up in conversation. His voice softened. His energy shifted. Underneath the image of the Prince of Darkness was still that young Beatles fan who never stopped being amazed by Paul McCartney. There's one particular reason this story continues affecting millions of people online. It reminds audiences that success never truly removes admiration. The public often assumes that once celebrities become famous, they stop looking up to anyone else. But this story proves the opposite. Even Ozzy Osbourne, one of the most influential rock stars who ever lived, still felt inspired, humbled, and emotionally moved by Paul McCartney. In many ways, that makes Ozzy feel more relatable and human than ever before. Fame never erased the fan inside him. As Ozzy's health struggles became more serious in recent years, the emotional impact of this story grew even stronger. Fans watched him battle Parkinson's disease, chronic pain, surgeries, and physical limitations that dramatically changed his daily life. Seeing a once unstoppable rock icon struggle simply to move at times became heartbreaking for audiences who grew up watching his chaotic stage performances. Yet despite everything, Ozzy continued speaking openly with fans, continuing interviews, and fighting to stay connected to music for as long as possible. That resilience transformed public perception completely. The man once mocked for outrageous behavior slowly became one of rock music's most respected survivors. And during this difficult chapter, tributes from fellow musicians began carrying enormous emotional weight. Every kind word felt meaningful because fans understood the reality of aging legends. The music world is slowly losing an entire generation of icons who defined culture for decades. So when Paul McCartney acknowledged Ozzy with warmth and sincerity, audiences immediately recognized the importance of that moment. This wasn't simply one celebrity complimenting another. This was one piece of music history honoring another piece of music history. The internet quickly exploded with emotional reactions from fans. Many people admitted they had never fully realized how deeply Ozzy admired Paul McCartney until old clips resurfaced online. Others became emotional watching interviews where Ozzy struggled to describe what the Beatles meant to him growing up. Some fans even said the story completely changed their perception of Ozzy. For years, mainstream media focused mostly on his controversies and shocking behavior. But stories like this revealed a softer, more emotional side of him that many people had never seen before. And honestly, that softer side may be the real Ozzy Osbourne. Behind all the headlines, behind the bat-biting stories, behind the wild reality television moments, there was always a man who genuinely loved music with his entire heart. A man who never forgot the artists who inspired him. A man who still became emotional talking about Paul McCartney even after achieving worldwide fame himself. That level of humility is surprisingly rare in entertainment. At the same time, Paul McCartney's role in this story reveals something equally powerful about his character. Throughout his career, Paul witnessed countless musicians praise him like a hero. But despite becoming one of the most famous people on earth, he largely maintained a calm and grounded personality. That's one reason so many artists speak about him with admiration. Paul never needed to behave like royalty, even though music history practically treats him that way. And perhaps Ozzy recognized that humility immediately whenever they met. There's also something deeply symbolic about the connection between the Beatles and Black Sabbath themselves. One represented the explosion of melody, experimentation, and optimism during the 1960s. The other represented the darker, heavier emotional realities that emerged afterward. Together, they almost tell the story of rock music's evolution across generations. And somehow, Paul McCartney and Ozzy Osbourne became living symbols of those completely different eras while still respecting each other enormously. Fans often search for dramatic secrets in celebrity stories because conflict creates attention. People expect rivalries, jealousy, and bitterness between powerful figures. But sometimes the truth is much more emotional than drama could ever be. Sometimes the real story is simply admiration, inspiration, gratitude. And that may be exactly why this story continues resonating with millions of people today. Because at its core, this isn't just a story about Paul McCartney and Ozzy Osbourne. It's a story about what music can do to human lives. A few songs from Liverpool reached a struggling young boy in Birmingham decades ago and changed his future forever. That boy grew up to inspire millions himself. And years later, the artist who unknowingly changed his life finally acknowledged him with respect and kindness. That's almost poetic when you think about it deeply enough. As fans continue reflecting on these emotional moments, one painful realization quietly lingers in the background. Time is moving forward. The legends who built modern music are getting older. Every interview now feels more important. Every appearance feels more fragile. Every emotional story carries heavier meaning because audiences understand these moments are becoming increasingly rare. And maybe that's why this story hit people so hard emotionally. It reminded the world that even legends eventually become vulnerable human beings facing time, aging, and mortality just like everyone else. In the end, perhaps the most beautiful part of this entire story is not the rumors, the headlines, or even the fame itself. It is the simple fact that after all the decades, after all the success, pain, chaos, and history, Ozzy Osbourne never forgot the music that first gave him hope. And Paul McCartney eventually recognized the extraordinary legacy of the boy who once sat listening to Beatles records and dreaming of a different life. That connection is bigger than rock music itself. It is bigger than celebrity culture. It is about inspiration passing from one generation to another and creating legends who continue shaping the world long after their songs are released. Paul McCartney gave the world melody, imagination, and timeless emotion, while Ozzy Osbourne gave the world fearlessness, honesty, and the courage to survive through darkness. Two completely different souls with two completely different sounds somehow became immortal chapters in the same story of music history. And maybe that is why millions of fans became emotional hearing Paul finally acknowledge Ozzy with warmth and genuine respect. Deep down, people realized they were witnessing something incredibly rare, not rivalry between legends, but humanity between them. As time moves forward, moments like these become priceless. One day the concerts will end, the interviews will stop, and the headlines will slowly fade away, but stories like this will survive forever. Future generations will still discover the Beatles, they will still discover Black Sabbath, and somewhere in the world another young kid sitting alone in a small room will hear those songs for the very first time and suddenly believe life can become something greater. Just like Ozzy once did. And perhaps that is the true power of music. Not fame, not money, and not controversy, but the ability to completely change a human life without even realizing it. In the end, Paul McCartney did not just inspire Ozzy Osbourne, he unknowingly helped create a legend. And decades later, one legend quietly honored another in the most emotional way possible. A full circle moment, a final emotional chapter, and a reminder that behind every legendary artist, there was once a dreamer listening to someone else's song and hoping that one day their own voice might also be heard by the world.